Hi, everybody. Welcome to chapters 3 and 4 in our juvenile delinquency course. I hope everything is going well. Again, if you have any questions for me, please feel free to send me an email or call my office as well. Okay? All right. So let's start. Chapter 3, Individual Causes of Delinquency. And yeah, I show some interesting pictures sometimes. I'm sure many of you have seen this, but considering that we're talking about juvenile justice, I really like this picture, the window cleaners at a children's hospital. Okay, let's get into it. Rationality and delinquency. In the 1970s and 80s, workers in a variety of academic disciplines, including the sociology of deviance, criminology, economics, and cognitive psychology, began to view crime as the outcome of rational choices and decisions. One thing you'll see in your textbook, and I'm hoping you all have it, the textbook by now, is there's a lot of theorists. There are a lot of individuals, men and women, who have studied these causations as to why people, and in this case specifically juveniles, commit crimes or become delinquent. They want to understand the criminal mind. So they develop these theories, they test them empirically, which means they'll do studies, they'll have certain groups come in, they'll eliminate certain groups, and they come to a conclusion. Well, and that's all good because in front of their peers, their academic peers, they get these studies published. Inevitably, there'll be someone, another theorist, who says, well, wait a minute, I think it's this, and I don't agree with you, and this is why. So we'll cover a lot of those because, in essence, there is some validity to all of them, and we'll cover that. I'm not going to jump ahead of myself. For rational choice theory is based on the perspective that criminality is a result of conscious choice, and individuals choose to commit crime when the benefits outweigh the costs of disobeying the law. It's like a scale. You can picture a scale. I'm picturing it in my hands, right and left hand. Well, if it's easy, okay, if I'm not going to get caught, if I'm a bad guy and I'm driving down a neighborhood and it's daytime and I do daytime burglaries and I don't see any people out, I don't see a lot of cars, I don't see a heavy police presence, and I've gotten away with it in this neighborhood or this square mileage already, why would I not continue? Whereas if I go down the road and their neighbor comes out and says, hey, what are you doing here? Or there's police cars that are patrolling, well, that rational choice, there's that risk reward factor that kicks in. I better not do this, not today. Is an extension of the classical school deterrence doctrine, yes. And some would argue that it's based on the concept of free will. Well, rational choice. Am I going to get caught? Am I not going to get caught? I'll make the decision. There's nothing causing me to do this. I'm looking at the risk reward factor. Philosophy of punishment. So let's discuss general deterrence. The idea that punishing one person for his or her criminal or delinquent act or acts will discourage others from committing similar acts. So let's do the same thing. This burglar finally gets caught or gets caught in his or her first attempt because he's not very good at what he does. It's in the paper, it's in the news, the public information officer for the agency speaks out on how we caught him, what we did. Others, bad guys and girls, read this and go, I'm not going to get caught, I'm going to stay away from that jurisdiction. Specific deterrence. The goal of criminal sentencing that seeks to prevent a particular offender from engaging in repeat criminality. So we caught you burglarizing this neighborhood. We're going to discipline you. We're going to sentence you. We're going to order you to parole, probation, whatever it may be. So specifically, we're looking to deter you from not doing this ever again. And there it is. Individual offenders should learn firsthand. Crime does not pay. Incapacitation. Isolating offenders to protect society. We would all agree that at some point this is necessary. Offenders are sentenced to prison to restrain them physically so that society is protected during the time they are confined. All right, so the born criminal. The belief that juveniles as a whole, their biological characteristics and limitations drive them to delinquent behavior. So now we're back looking at the three causations. And in this one in specifics, we're talking about genetic predisposition. Are they born to be bad? We write songs about this, born to be wild, born to be bad, and so forth. But there are theorists that say, yeah, that genetics does play a part in this. And that's called biological positivism. And in the United States, it can be divided into two periods. One, the nature-nurture debate during the 19th and 20th century. And two, the influence of Italian criminologist, and this is important to know, this guy, Cesare Lombroso. You may see him in a quiz, just a clue. He's regarded as the founder of biological positivism. Lombroso is best known for his theory of the atavistic criminal. We'll cover that in a moment. Well, we'll cover it now. According to Lombroso, the born criminal was atavistic. In other words, you need to know this term as well. You might see it on a quiz. He is someone who reverts to an earlier evolutionary form or level. So we've evolved. We've evolved into this normal society, our cultural norms. So we've risen to a point where we are not of the criminal mind. So we revert back into a place and time, whenever that may be, that we were more of a hunter-gatherer and didn't look at the repercussions of our actions. Interesting. So, psychopathy, the criminal mind of a serial killer. So let's look into some cases. There are several myths applied to serial killers. One, that serial killers are monsters. Movies such as Friday the 13th and A Nightmare on Elm Street, perhaps you remember them. If you don't, that's my generation. They were interesting. Two, all serial killers are charming and handsome. Three, they are extremely intelligent, resembling Hannibal Lecter in The Silence of the Lambs. And there's Hannibal. But the reality is that most serial killers are ordinary people who on the outside appear to be normal. There are some, however, who bear strong resemblances to these fictional characters, or at least we depict them as that, and the movie writers glorify these individuals, which is a sad state of affairs. The average killer only has a high school education. Did you know that? Only 4% graduate from college, so they're not all geniuses. The majority have blue-collar jobs, which is great. You know, not to knock blue-collar jobs, but we're not talking about Rhodes Scholars here. So, causations. Let's look into this a little bit further. Instinct theory. We are born with a set of biologically based behaviors essential for survival. These instincts are primal and genetically based. So we're born with a set of codes, a set of chromosomes, and digging down even deeper, uncovering the layers like an onion, we are set. We are set when we're born. This is who we're going to be and how we're going to be, based on instinct theory. So let's look at environmental theory. Personality and social skills are complex genetic blend of an individual's temperament. So now we're looking at the way we grew up, not so much what we're made out of, but what we were affected by and our influences. So human development is a sequence of events and challenges. They play an intricate role in our lives. These choices and parental influences help to decide who we are. So, as I said, we're going to focus on a few serial killers. So let's look at Theodore Bundy. And it might be before some of your times, but it's worth looking into because it's an interesting case file. Ted Bundy. All right. He was born Theodore Cole, the son of Air Force veteran, but rather remained unknown to him. He didn't know his dad. He lived with grandparents and led to believe that they were his parents and his mother was his older sister. So, start off with a set of lies. Moved to Washington State, where the mother met another enlisted man with the last name of Bundy. So he was initially Theodore Cowell, never knew his dad, thought his grandparents were his parents, thought his mom was his sister. Ted remained detached from his father and spent a lot of time alone, possibly leading to his social ineptness. Some bad news. Ted's mother delivered startling news to him. His older sister was actually his mother, and his parents were grandparents. Apparently, this news reportedly made him nasty, surly, and untrusting, and basically he went off. He went off the deep end, got really upset. And any one of us in this situation perhaps would be having a hard time with this as well. Bundy killed over 40 young women and over a 10-year period. But he made mistakes. His first mistake in 1974, he tried to abduct a young woman posing as an undercover detective, one of his favorite ploys, so he was posing as a cop. When he produced a pair of handcuffs and a crowbar, she fought back and fled. She got away. Police were called. The following summer, Bundy was stopped by police after driving suspiciously. He was arrested after a vehicle pursuit. He fought in a short foot pursuit. They got him. He was sentenced to 15 years in prison for the attack. But evidence surfaced in a Colorado case linking him to another similar attack. So they decided to extradite him. They extradited him to Colorado and he escaped. He fled in the mountains and hid there for 8 days. But he got caught, but still remained quiet to a barrage of questioning. Of course, people want to know why. 6 months later, he escaped again. Well, I tell you, it's kind of embarrassing being in this profession that he keeps on escaping. Maybe he's just that smart. But then he fled to Florida. So Bundy hit the campus of Florida State University, where he attacked 4 women in a sorority house. 2 were hurt and others were killed. One victim was able to ID her attacker, however. He was captured once again in Pensacola and placed on trial for 4 murders. But the most crucial piece of evidence in the trial was a bite mark that was left on one of the victims. Anybody who has taken my CSI class or is planning on it, perhaps in the future, we discuss this. So what a great evidentiary find. Bundy, in the end, was executed in 1989. In his statements before his execution, Bundy says, "Murder isn't just a crime of lust or violence. It becomes possession. They are part of you. You feel that last bit of breath leaving their bodies. You're looking into their eyes. A person in that situation is God." Bundy kept many skulls, which was pretty sick, as trophies. And he says, when you work hard for something, you don't want to forget it. So why? One could blame Ted's shocking parental saga, or the environment in which he was raised. There is no evidence of genetic disorders, at least that we know of. So what drove a seamlessly intelligent, motivated man towards sexual deviance and murder? Perhaps we'll never know. All right, our next focus. One of America's most prolific killers, killing at least 17 victims between 1978 and 1991. His name is Jeffrey Dahmer. Some notable traits: that he was homosexual, kept many of his dead bodies at his residence, torturing them and performing sex acts on their dead bodies. He wasn't abused as a child or the product of bad parenting. The father was a chemist who was working towards his PhD. But the parents divorced when he was 18. Dahmer became obsessed with dead animals, tortured them, and manipulated their dead bodies. He had fantasies about having sex with and killing men, but never acted on them, at least in the beginning. After high school, He picked up a male hitchhiker, drank, and had sex. The man wanted to go, but Dahmer became enraged, killing him with a barbell. He cut the body into pieces and burned it in the woods by his house. Dahmer flunked out of Ohio State University and enlisted in the military, but apparently he was kicked out due to alcoholism. It was assumed that Dahmer did not kill anyone in the military, as German police never connected any evidence to murders to him. So they had some cases over there, but they could never connect them. Dahmer went back home to Ohio, dug up a body of a victim that he first killed, and pounded it into pieces with a sledgehammer. This is rage. The killing spree ensues. He began to entice young men to have sex with him and murdered them. He acted out fantasies. One victim, Tracy Adams, he escaped. He escaped his apartment, running down the street naked, and alerted a police car. He showed police to Dahmer's apartment. They found 11 victims, much in the freezer refrigerator and boiled on the top of the stove. Dahmer confessed to murders and spoke of how he processed. That's an interesting term. Again, I got all this based on my research. He processed the victim's meat, and that eating human flesh was arousing to him. He admitted to performing lobotomies on some of the victims. Okay, some statements made by Dahmer. I have to question whether or not there is evil force in the world and whether or not I have been influenced by it. Although I am not sure if there is a God or if there is a devil, I know that lately I've been doing a lot of thinking about both. So psychologists convened, they interviewed him, and this is their review. Several psychologists concurred that Dahmer was manipulative, resistant, and evasive. However, he was not, and I put in all caps, not diagnosed with any mental disease. He was sane. So now we're ruling out genetic predisposition, at least according to these psychologists from what they know. We're looking at environmental causation, perhaps. During his trial, he was articulate and convincing. In 1992, the jury found him guilty after a 5-hour deliberation and sentenced to life in prison. But 2 years later, in 1994, he was killed by a fellow inmate. Thus, the end of Jeffrey Dahmer. So the question is, did Dahmer act out of free will? Was his environment a cause? Or, in the end, did he just act out of free will? Interesting question. And your thoughts? I know I can't hear you, but I want you to think about this. These are just some highlighted cases, but as a whole, you as a criminal justice major and future law enforcement officer, at some point you may be interviewing people. If you're a detective, you need to try to think about what it is they do or what motivates them, because it can make you a good interviewer. You need to try to pick them apart and see what it is that gets them to talk. How can you relate to people? So it's a good tactic. Nevertheless, something you need to try to understand at least. All right, so let's move on. One's environment. How about the social class? Research traditionally has been unable to find a clear relationship between social class and delinquency. It may also be that delinquent acts of adolescents from lower class backgrounds are more serious than those committed by youth from upper class backgrounds. Hold on one second. Okay. Gotta check something. All right. So psychology and criminality. Learning, aggression, and violence. Social learning theory maintains that delinquent behavior is learned through the same psychological process as any other behavior. So let's look at direct experience, kind of like putting your hand on top of a hot stove. What people learn from direct experience is determined by what they do and what happens to them. So it's a learned event, just like kids, just like dogs learn from being corrected. The hot stove analogy I thought was something that clarified this. But sociobiology stresses the interaction between the biological factors. So now we're looking at genetic predisposition, those factors, within an individual and the influence of a particular environment. So now we're combining the two. So now there's thought that genetic predisposition is just as, not more than, but just as effectual or can be shown as a causation as one's environment, how they grew up, what other influence took place. So supporters of this form of biological positivism claim that what produces delinquent behavior, like other behaviors, is a combination. How about personality? All right, this is interesting. So I had a phone interview some years back. The doctor, his name is Stanton Samnow. I know it looks like Same Now, but it's Samnow. He's a clinical psychologist for adolescent inpatient psychiatric services. He led the program for the investigation of criminal behavior at St. Elizabeth's Hospital in DC. And to this day, he continues to specialize on the evaluation and treatment of juvenile and adult offenders. He's the author of The Criminal Personality. It's an interesting book if you want to read about this. It goes into depth. It's interesting. He said that criminals share abnormal thinking patterns that lead to decisions to commit crimes. So he was a believer in this combo of genetic predisposition and environmental causation. That's what he hung his hat on. And listening to him was very interesting. Is it? Is it just environmental or is it too? Good question. So, in the end, can all deviance be attributed to free will? Remember that scale I talked about in the beginning with the burglar? Well, here it is again. Free will, good and bad. Something we need to think about. 1970s and 80s, workers in a variety of academic disciplines. Remember, I'm talking again about theorists, including the sociology of deviance, criminology, economics. They're doing it again. They're thinking about what it is that causes people to do what they do. So rational choice theory kicks in. Do we make a decision rationally of what we want to do? Thus, as you see in the picture, the fish bowl. One fish, not going to swim with the others. I'm going to jump to the other. Rational choice theory is based on the assumption that the delinquent or the criminal chooses to violate law and has free will to do so. That it's not anything to do with one's genetic predisposition nor environmental causation. It's not anything. That we just do it because we want to. So, again with rational choice, rationality theory is based on the notion that delinquent behavior is planned, at least to some degree. So they won't come out and say that it's 100%, but at least to some degree it's planned. And the planning involves formulating a scheme or procedure for doing something before doing it or having an intention of acting, kind of like first-degree murder. You know, if you show that someone committed first-degree murder, it was premeditated, it was well thought, it was planned. Now, not getting into the criminal law factor, it's a different class. But, again, I think you get the point. So assessing the possible alternative courses of actions available. All right, I like to kind of change gears in between chapters. So being that I was in law enforcement for almost 3 decades, we used to always tease with the firemen. And I found this picture and I thought it was funny. It's not where I worked, but it sure as heck looked like one of the substations to where I worked. And we would do things of this nature. There's a traffic trailer and obviously the police officer or police officers, but shush, firemen sleeping. It's kind of funny. Okay, so moving on. Juvenile Justice, Chapter 4. Remember, you're watching, this is one long lecture, but it's in 2 parts. So you need to answer the assignment for Chapter 3 and then answer the assignment for Chapter 4. Okay? All right, moving on. All right, so chapter 4, the relatively stable formal and informal arrangements that characterize a society, including its economic arrangements, social institutions, and values and norms. So a mouthful. Social structure helps shape human behavior and is related to delinquency by way of such factors as child poverty, racial disparity, disorganized communities, and unemployment. So we're really picking apart the second causation, which is environmental in this one. So social process theories. We examine the interactions between individuals and their environments for clues of the root causes of delinquency. And as I put that picture down at the bottom, I found it interesting. It takes a village. And we've all heard that quote. Um, but in this theory, in social process theories, we look at not so much as the individual, but we look at the influences around them. Most youngsters are influenced by their family, school, their peers, and you see where I'm going with this. It's all outside influences, things that you're interacting, you or we as a society are interacting with on a daily basis. Social process theories look into the interaction between individuals and their environments for clues. We're looking for clues. So, social disorganization. Let's look at the macro level, the macro society forces that it influence why we, I use in quotes, do what we do. So the macro forces such as segregation, structural transformation of the economy, housing, discrimination, they all interact. They all interact with community level factors such as concentrated poverty, family disruption, residential turnover. And all these factors have a sometimes negative influence on social organization. So you're a kid, you're growing up in an area, perhaps it's inner city, and you feel like you're segregated from the rest of the society. You can't afford much, so the economy is in effect. Your housing, you're living in an apartment because your family cannot afford to get a home outside the city. So other people like you are in the same position. Perhaps there's divorce or separation that's a factor. And it's kind of like a rotating door with people living and moving out, say the apartment building. So there's no stability. Delinquent behavior came to be seen as an alternate mode of socialization through which youths were part of disorganized communities. So they're kind of attracted to each other. It's, they're all living the same life, so they start to understand and look for that outlet. Juvenile delinquency is a result from the breakdown of social control amongst the traditional primary groups, such as the family and the neighborhood, because of social disorganization. Well, let's look at rapid industrialization, urbanization, immigration. And these processes contribute to this organization. So it's constant change and not always for the good. So delinquent behavior, it kind of becomes an alternative mode of socialization, which is interesting. An alternative mode of socialization through which youths were part of disorganized communities. They were attracted. They're attracted to each other, kind of like a moth to a flame, and they understand each other. And here's a picture. These are community zones, and this is just Chicago, but it doesn't have to be Chicago. It can be any city. It can be Atlanta. It can be DC. It can be Portland, Oregon. I think you get the point. Dallas. It doesn't matter. But you look at the zones, and this is in your textbook. So in the middle, we talked about this loop, this issue that all those factors kind of kicked in. And that's a central business district, commercial, government, and so forth. Well, surrounding that, we have the factory zone, and then, as they call it, ghetto and slum. I'm not a big fan of that, but it's these apartment buildings. It's these places to where all these factors that we discussed a few slides ago, well, they all exist. Well, then we go outward and we look at, I'm highlighting here, the second immigrant settlement. So we're leaving the ghetto slum from this area, perhaps going to the second immigrant settlement. And we're hoping as a kid and perhaps as an adult, we're trying to get to this outer layer, this single family dwelling. Sometimes we can't get the mouse out of there. Sometimes we can't. Sometimes we can't escape that. So we become jealous, we become bitter, we think that we're stuck, that we can't escape this loop that we're in. So delinquency ensues. All right. So the result of low-income environment. A socially disorganized neighborhood. And this is a flow chart, it's in your book. So we have a failure, the next bullet, if you will, the next bubble, failure of informal social controls. We don't have anybody to tell us no. We don't have anybody to hold our hand as a young kid and guide us. All we have is this what we see on the outside. So perhaps we turn to an increased, we turn to gang activity. Perhaps that's the only outlet. Cultural transmission of delinquent traditions. Then increased delinquent activity. You see the flow chart, the end result. Miller, another theorist, his theory of lower class culture. All right, so we have economic segregation. And I'll let you to read this in the flow chart ensues. And at the end, lower class male delinquency. Again, I'm just highlighting another page in your book. Strain theory. A major reason for the widespread acceptance of strain theory was that its central thesis of blocked opportunity resonated with Americans' growing concern over equal opportunity, and with a fear that social injustice had deep cultural roots. The limited or non-existent chance of success, according to strain theory, a key factor of delinquency, leads to status offenses and much more, such as hard time. Okay. So, another theorist, Cohen's theory, delinquent subcultures. In delinquent boys, so let's look at boys, for example, the culture of the gang. Cohen, he suggested that lower class youths are internalizing the goals of middle class culture, but that they experience status frustration. So they want to move on. They want to better themselves. So that's in them. But they experience status frustration, meaning I can't get there. Or I'm being told there's no way I can get there. No one to motivate me. So we call it strain, okay? Because they're unable to obtain these goals. So they turn to gangs. So consequently, the strain explains their membership in delinquent gangs and their non-utilitarian, malicious, and negativistic behavior. Cut that R off, but you get the point. We have norms, and they see this. Such norms in the middle class, such as ambition, individual responsibility, achievement, temperance, rationality, courtesy, likability. It's interesting, meaning that they gravitate to gangs. Less physical aggression, educational, recreation, respect for property. So Cohen believes that these feelings or these motivations are innate, that these individuals, although they're delinquent or criminal, they still want this. They want these things. They want these norms. But there's that picture, that danger, the falling of the middle class. So one could argue that there is no middle class, that there is either the delinquent realm, the environmental causation, and then the elitists. I'm not a big proponent of this theory. Nevertheless, again, a theory. Why? It's a good question. And there are those out there, and it might be something that you want to do as far as your critical thinking paper. You might want to ask why, and you might want to dig in to try to figure out why people become gang members. So there you go, paper idea. Criminal subculture. Criminal subculture is primarily based on criminal values. So within this subculture, illegal acts such as extortion, fraud, and theft are accepted. They're accepted as means to achieve economic success. So you not only are accepted by doing these things, but you're expected to do them. It's part of who you are. The criminal subculture is primarily based on criminal values. So this subculture provides the socialization by which new members learn to admire and respect older criminals and to adopt their lifestyles and behaviors. Social control theory. This is interesting. So Hershey, you might want to remember this. This is important. In his book, The Causes of Delinquency, he linked delinquent behavior to the quality of the bond an individual has with society. And he states, and I put this in bold, that delinquent acts result when an individual's bond to society is weak or broken. So we as a society have that power. You as a criminal justice professional or a future one, you have the power, according to Hershey, to step in and have a positive effect. The commitment to social bond, according to Hershey, is made up of four main elements. Here they are: attachment, commitment, involvement, and belief. Okay. I'm working on it. Hopefully it works. And maybe it won't. Hang on a moment. All right. Technical difficulties happen. It just accentuates my point. Nevertheless, he just talks about it in depth. So, in the end, the result, you have weak attachment, as I mentioned, weak commitment, weak involvement, and weak belief. No one to hold them up, no one to motivate them, no one to tell them that you can. You absolutely can, and I'm here to guide you. So, it all points to perhaps at some point non-serious delinquency. And you can look at status offenses. Perhaps they're truant, perhaps they skip school, perhaps, those other issues of that nature. There's no stakes. There's no stakes in conformity. Why should they? Why will they? All right. So as we move on, let's discuss social capital. Lower class youngsters often lack access to social capital, which is to the norms, the networks, and supportive relationships they need if they are to realize their potential. They lack it. And I showed this picture. I think it's either inner city, I think it is, but it's a long time ago. They grow up and they don't have access to the outside world. All right. So research suggests that delinquency is more likely to occur in those families in which parental self-control is low. So parenting, we're still looking at environmental causation because parenting falls under that category. Moreover, that link was shown to be correlated with a great incidence of delinquency among children raised in families exhibiting low parental self-control. So the parents are not involved. So what's your opinion? Do you feel genetic predisposition is valid? Do you feel environmental causation is valid? What about free will? Or perhaps it's a combination of two or more. Maybe it's all of them. It's a good question, isn't it? That could be your paper as well. I welcome anybody. If you all want to share the same topic, that's fine. It's something to think about. Okay, I try to do a final thought. So I don't want you to get lost in your shadow. In other words, I want you to stand, and it doesn't mean that you're arrogant, but it means I want you to stand above and be proud of yourself. I'm here to motivate you the best that I can. Your peers are here to motivate you. There are other factors. Sometimes you have to find your own way, but don't get lost. Let's see if I can get this to play. There we go.
I walk a lonely road, the only one that I have ever known. Don't know where it goes, but it's home to me, and I walk alone. I walk this empty street on the boulevard of broken dreams, where the city sleeps and I'm the only one, and I walk alone. I walk alone, I walk alone. I walk alone, I walk up. My shadow's only one that walks beside me. My shallow heart's the only thing that's beating. Sometimes I wish someone up there will find me. Till then I walk alone. I'm walking down the line that divides me somewhere in my mind, on the borderline of the edge and where I walk alone. Read between the lines what's fucked up and everything's alright. Check my vital signs and know I'm still alive, and I walk alone. I walk alone, I walk alone. I walk alone, I walk up. My shadow's only one that walks beside me. My shallow heart's the only thing that's beating. Sometimes I wish someone up there will find me. Till then I walk alone. I walk alone, I walk alone. I walk this empty street on the boulevard of broken dreams, where the city sleeps and I'm the only one, and I walk up. My shadow's only one that walks beside me. My shallow heart's the only thing that's beating. Sometimes I wish someone up there will find me. Till then I walk alone.
I hope you got a bit out of that. So walk tall, future cops. All right, next week, get your assignments submitted. You guys got my email. If you have any clarification, I understand there was an issue with the discussion, but do your assignments. Take the quizzes. You know, they're lumped up. There's two together because of the summer semester is expedited. Just go ahead and get them done. Also look at their critical thinking assignment, the due date. Look at what it is that what the qualifiers are, I should say. Pick a chapter. I don't want a book report. Again, I do not want a book report. Get an idea from the chapters. Let me know what chapter motivated you, but go from there. And if you want some help, email me. Let me know. Bounce some ideas off of me. I'm here to help. You don't have to think that you're doing this all alone. That's my job. If you want me to review what you've written and make some suggestions or pointers, I will do that as well. Okay? All right. That's it. All right. I hope you have a great week. You take care.